Hi everyone, my name's Adam, and today we're going to talk to you about two contrasting tabloid newspapers, The News of the World and The News on Sunday. Before I go into the introduction, I'll just let the rest of my group introduce themselves. So,
hi, I'm Alex.
Sophie. I'm Sally.
And Brian. So first, can we just ask how many people have heard of The News of the World? Okay, and how many people have heard of News on Sunday? Okay, so about even. So what we're going to do is well, the most likely reason for many of you not hearing about the News on Sunday is the fact that many of you weren't born before it closed. It was only open for a short period of time, as you'll find out later. So we're going to start the presentation with some information on the News on Sunday, so you're aware of the intentions of the paper. So now I'll give you a brief outline of what we're going to talk about. So first I'm going to give you a short introduction to both the papers and some background information. We'll then look at the success enjoyed by the News of the World, followed by the failure of the News on Sunday and the reasons behind this. We're then going to look at the ethics, or lack of ethics, from the News of the World and some of the unethical practices undertaken, as well as looking at the management strategies employed by both the papers and the implications of these strategies. And then we'll finish with a brief summary. So I'm going to hand you over to Celine, who's going to give you an introduction on the News on Sunday.
Hi, I'm Sally. I'm going to give a brief introduction of News on Sunday. It was a British tabloid newspaper which launched in April 1987. The publication ceased 7 months later. Its headquarters was located in Manchester, which was criticized as away from the centre of national political activities. The founder of the paper were former members of the left-wing group, the Big Flame. The Flame adds getting a radical campaigning tabloid Sunday newspaper in order to challenging the right-wing domination of media. The paper gave a controlling interest to a collective of workers, and its share issued 6.5 million from trade union. And Kay Sutton was appointed as the editor. The paper once attempted to distance themselves from those images of topless ladies, for example, the News of the World, and emphasis on overt political agenda. Since they used the slogan "No tits, but a lot of balls," which offended the feminists working on paper, and subsequently dropped it. There are several arguments about the position of the failure of News on Sunday, since that if John Pillar was pushed out, who's involved in the downward period. Some blame Kay Sutton, some argue it's the news values, because in the first edition, their lead story is about Brazil boy. He sold his kidney to pay for the medical care, which is considered as inappropriate as the British Sunday news lead story. I will pass it to Sophie and Alex to talk about News of the World.
Thank you. I'll just give you a brief history of News of the World newspaper. The first edition was published on the 1st of October 1843 and was sold for 3p per copy. This low price undercut all other newspapers, making it the cheapest newspaper at the time. The publisher, John Brown Bell, had a specific direction in which he wanted to go. This included provocative, controversial and biased themes, and claimed to be a paper that wasn't afraid to tell the truth. Bell believed that this, at an extremely low price, would lead the paper to success. By 1880, the paper was selling 30,000 copies per week. In 1891, Bell sold the paper to the journalist Henry Lascelles Carr. The News of the World then expanded its repertoire to sport in the hope to expand its customer base, and it worked. Circulation rose to 3 million. The 168-year-old Institute became Britain's biggest selling newspaper. Now we will look more into the success of News of the World. The company hit its peak in the 1950s when selling over 8 million copies was a regular occurrence. The success enjoyed by News of the World was due to its controversial storylines, specialising in celebrity gossip, sex scandals and sensational crimes. It was also the cheapest newspaper of its time. 21% of its readers were aged 35 to 44, the biggest single group, and 61% were in the lowest social classes.
Okay, so I'm now going to talk about the management strategies used by the News of the World and News Corporation. Rupert Murdoch's company News Corporation bought the paper in 1969. Management experts have since raised questions about Mr. Murdoch's leadership style. It has been described as insular, meaning that he was uninterested in other people's ideas, cultures and people's views and was adverse to change. Ordinary shareholders also began to question whether or not it made sense for Mr Murdoch, who only owns 39.8% of the company, to exercise such tremendous control over affairs. It is only because he created a special class of shares with preferential voting rights that he was able to continue to run his empire like a privately owned family business. Investors also questioned Mr Murdoch's brand of leadership. For instance, did it really make sense to put out 2 seasoned Formula executives to make room for Mr Murdoch's children in top posts of the company? This is a concept known as nepotism, where favouritism is granted in politics or businesses to relatives and family members. It's also been debated as to why News Corp did not separate the roles of the chairman and the CEO, a move that would bring a strong independent voice into the boardroom. According to GMI research, almost half of all major companies have a chairman to serve alongside the CEO. When the newspaper finally closed, Murdoch used his control over 2 other large newspapers to limit the amount of press tarnishing his reputation. This graph, shown on a previous slide, shows just how popular the News of the World was compared to its other rivals. Just under 1 million more copies of the News of the World were sold to the next best competitor, the Mail on Sunday. As you can see, News Corporation also had a very large market share, owning the Sunday Times and the Sun on Sunday. I'm now going to show you a quote from Andy Coulson, the former editor-in-chief. On the 21st of July 2009, Coulson appeared in front of the House of Commons Culture, Media and Sport Select and denied any knowledge of the phone hacking scandal, saying, "My instructions to staff were clear. We did not use subterfuge of any kind unless there was clear public interest in doing so." It is clear from this quote that Coulson did not believe he was doing wrong when invading the privacy of others, as he felt it was in the interest of the British public to know the information he was reporting on. I'll now pass you over to Adam, who's going to talk more about Coulson and the unethical behaviour of the News of the World.
Thanks, Alex. I'm just going to discuss some of the unethical practices carried out by the News of the World, which ultimately led to their failure. So the first point I made was the use of bribery. So the News of the World were often bribing individuals in order to get the best headlines. So most noticeably, 5 policemen have been bribed in excess of £100,000. The bribes took place to gain information such as bank statements, medical records and confidential information. One former reporter said he was encouraged to bribe police officers in the 1980s, which shows the early intentions of the News of the World. I've also listed a few other unethical practices that was carried out. And another former News of the World reporter, Graham Johnson, told the BBC he was encouraged to use private detectives and often exaggerated stories. When asked why he did this, he said the paper was driven by a culture of fear, and he felt he had to do these things in order to keep his job, which gives you an indication of the pressures from above. I'm also going to talk about one other unethical practice, known as the phone hacking scandal. Early accusations in 2005 were that the News of the World had been hacking the phones of the royal family. And Clive Goodman on the right-hand side of the top picture there was later accused and found guilty of hacking the royal family, as well as several other public figures. He was then jailed in 2007. The News of the World responded by saying that he claimed that he was just a rogue editor, and there was no widespread corruption across the paper. However, in 2011, this was proven not to be the case. Andy Coulson on the left was also charged and jailed for hacking phones, and in particular the phone of one Millie Dowler. I'm sure many of you have heard of Millie Dowler's story, but for those who haven't, Alex will give you a short story of the events that occurred.
For those who don't know, Millie Dowler was a 13-year-old girl who was abducted on her way home from school in March 2002. Her body was not found until September of that year, and during this time the News of the World had been hacking Millie's phone in order to gain information about her whereabouts. They were listening to her voicemails as well as deleting them. Millie's parents would also ring her phone and would be used to hearing the automated message stating that the voicemail was full. However, on one occasion the voicemail service was not full. This led her parents to believe that Millie was still alive and listening to and deleting these messages, when in fact it was the News of the World. This gave the family false hope and was a very traumatic situation for them. It is important to realise that the News of the World were not doing this for the benefit of Millie or the Dowler family, but were purely doing it to be the first tabloid to reveal information on the whereabouts of Millie and ultimately to sell the most papers. Eventually, after a long 9-year wait, the Dowler family awarded £3 million in compensation, and Andy Coulson, along with many other editors and reporters, were jailed.
So ultimately, this was the beginning of the end for the News of the World, as many more phone hacking allegations began to surface. As well as this, many large organisations began to pull their advertisements from the News of the World, and Rupert Murdoch had no option but to withdraw the paper after 168 years in the print. So finally, we feel this quote from a recent leadership book nicely sums up the unethical behaviour at the News of the World. It says, power at its most basic level is defined as somebody influencing another to get that person to do something they would otherwise not do. The abuse of power was very evident at the News of the World, and employees were expected to carry out unethical practices in order to keep their jobs and their superiors happy. So I'll now pass you over to Celine, who's going to look at the very different reasons for the failure of the News on Sunday.
Thanks, Adam. As we know, the News on Sunday only survived for 7 months, so there are several management problems that lead to their failure. First, marketing positioning. One of the first choice that a firm has to make on launching a new product is market position, which is that product to occupy. Although limited award is received for getting it right, firm cannot afford to get positioning wrong. In this case, News on Sunday wanted to get a radical campaigning, so they find left-wing individuals to write articles. However, working class has little taste of this product, while middle and upper classes are more political conscious, so they are not attracted as trivial as News on Sunday. The paper was packaging wrong things together. As a result, the product is no one's first best. Poor research is another problem. Given the original market research, sales are projected over 1 million, and the break-even point is 0.8 million copies. So it not seem to be a problem at the time. However, the first issue only sold about 0.5 million, and it decreased continuously. Let's pass into Brian to talk another problem of the management.
Thank you. Conflicts of interest arose due to the lack of any proper leadership shown by anyone in the management team, and there were constant clashes between the editorial staff and the upper tier management. Now this led to the loss of the paper's main ideas and goals, which was a huge problem for such an idealistic left-wing tabloid such as News on Sunday. We will now show you a short clip from BBC documentary that will further illustrate our point.
So you had the likes of Keith Sutton, Colton Lee, me, all arguing about our causes, but actually they were all clashing. What we needed was a leader who said, look, I hear what you say, but this is what's going to happen.
The leader they might have looked to was Alan Hayling, but he was no longer chief executive. Since Pilger's departure, he'd reinvented himself as editorial director.
He changed titles and responsibilities throughout the period I was there.
Now as shown on the screen, this is a flowchart showing the hierarchy of the News on Sunday. Now right at the top you have the founders, the ones who started the paper, and they wanted a left-wing tabloid. However, all the inexperienced staff below them wanted just a regular run-of-the-mill tabloid. This was partly due to the fact that all the positions were filled by inexperienced staff. Now, inexperience was a big problem in this organization because everything, including the editors and the editor-in-chief, they were occupied by unqualified people. What do we mean when we say unqualified? We'll now show you another clip to just show how mismatched they were for their positions.
I was head of personnel and equal opportunities.
And had you done that job anywhere before?
No.
Had you ever been foreign editor on a national paper?
I'd never been foreign editor of any national newspaper.
Did you have any experience of working on a tabloid?
No, I'd never worked on a national tabloid.
Had you ever worked on a tabloid before?
No.
And had you ever worked in personnel before?
No.
Had you ever been editor-in-chief of a national newspaper?
No.
Had you ever been sales director on a national newspaper?
Never.
Had you been the editor of a national newspaper before?
No.
Alright, now Celine will take you through the strengths and weaknesses of the SWOT analysis that we've done for News on Sunday. Celine.
Our analysis to sum up the failure of News on Sunday. And I will do the internal factors, Brian will do the external ones. In strength part, according to Big Flame websites, shortly after publication, as crisis hits, the company hired a company fireman whose job is to find demotivated people who are not good at their jobs. The fireman finds nothing but felt puzzled and said the company has highly motivated people, but he can't find why the company bankrupt. In weakness part, due to the inexperienced staff, the paper journal is inappropriately stored, like I mentioned earlier. Again, being far from the political center is a location disadvantage. Furthermore, the slogan not only offended feminists, but also cut the sales. As Brian illustrated earlier, their position changed frequently, so they have a schizophrenic decision-making structure. Another reason is founders took over the management and hired a group of journalists. But the founders clearly know the radical angles they want to put in their news, but had no idea to manage. I think if they do the opposite, they hire a group of managers and take the position of journalists, they can turn the weakness into strength, and the situation will be more favorable to them. Okay, Brian?
Thank you. The opportunities and threats were heavily influenced by the political situation at the time. So first of all, for the opportunities, firstly, they were one of the only left-wing tabloids on the market at the time, and they failed to capitalize on this due to their internal struggles. Secondly, they were funded heavily by the Labour Party that was running, and they could have taken this as an opportunity to push themselves back in the right direction to being a left-wing newspaper. As for the threats, as I mentioned earlier, the Labour Party that was running at the time, they were running against the famous Margaret Thatcher. So had the paper gone down, eventually they did. But had they succeeded beyond the point of the results of the elections after the Labour Party lost, there can be little to no doubt that the paper itself would have gone into decline as well. I'll now pass it over to Sophie, who will bring you through the last parts of our presentation.
Thank you. I'm now going to conclude our presentation. The News of the World was a very successful paper for a very long time. They knew their readers and what they wanted. Its controversial themes and affordable prices made it hugely successful throughout its time, and they believe they are untouchable. Editors were forced into acting ethically and were treated with being fired if they did not do what they were told, even though many disagreed with the methods editors were using. As time went on, people's habits began to change, and sitting down to read a newspaper every Sunday was no longer the norm. As technology improved, more and more people were using iPads, tablets and the internet to get news and celebrity gossip, resulting in less people buying papers. While we believe the major failures of News of the World was due to its unethical behaviour, it also didn't keep up with the current trends. For example, the Mail on Sunday created an award-winning website called Mail Online, which was very popular with its readers. In a bid to get back their leading position, News of the World turned to unethical methods, doing anything they could to be the first to report on major and controversial storylines. When they finally got caught, there was such outcry, and the reaction of the British public meant there was no coming back. Now, the News on Sunday was around for 2 months and only actually published 8 issues. They hired staff who had little or no experience in their roles, and there was a huge lack of leadership. It was a left-wing paper aiming to print factual news stories. However, their first story was about a boy who stole swimming, which didn't appeal to their target market. Thank you very much for listening to our presentation today, and I welcome any questions and comments.